Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. We have New York Times best-selling author Homer Hickam, author of Rocket Boys, with his new novel, Carrying Albert Home. You're going to laugh your head off. This one is a keeper. Homer, welcome back to Anderson's in Naperville.
Well, thank you, Becky. It's great to be back. What's it been, like 18 years since Rocket Boys? But that kind of shows that Carrying Albert Home is popular. And also it's another story of sort of about Colwood, except long before I was born. So maybe that's the genre I should stick with. I don't know, because I love coming here. It's great.
Yeah, no, we love having you here. And this book is really special. But I want to know, what are you hearing from all your readers? It's been out in the world about 2.5 weeks now. So what are you hearing from some of your readers that follow you?
They want to know who the rooster is, and why is the rooster in this book?
Yeah, no, we don't want to give too many spoilers. No, that is one of my questions. So,
it says it right up front.
That's right.
It says, you know, this book stars Homer, who thought what he did caused the journey, and Elsie, who thought what she said caused the journey, and Albert, who actually did cause the journey, and the rooster, whose presence is not entirely understood.
Right. So that's right. So this story, it's the story of your mom and dad. You know, your mom and dad and an alligator, which is, I mean, this is such a love triangle like none other. I think we've heard
the
before.
Eternal love triangle. The only problem is one part of the triangle is kind of green and scaly.
Yeah, a little reptilian. Yeah, right here. So your dad, Homer Sr., Homer Hickam Sr., and your mom, Elise Lavender, well, eventually Elsie. I'm sorry, not Elsie.
That's okay, because
I
throughout this book, both Homer and Elsie's name are garbled for various reasons.
Well, that's
so
right.
Why you
that's right. Right. So your parents and this epic journey they go on, but where did the seed start for you wanting to tell their story and this journey they take within?
Well, I'll tell you the truth.
Okay.
It actually started with that movie, October Sky, because I thought my mother was horribly misrepresented in that movie, and so did she, because it showed her more or less as a coal miner's wife, kind of a wimpy little woman who didn't have an opinion, who even let her son quit school and all this nonsense. And so I started telling the story. When I'd go out making speeches, I'd say, let me tell you who my mom really is.
Right, sure.
And so I started telling this story where she wanted to get out of the coal field so bad. When she graduated from high school, she headed off to Florida to live with her rich Uncle Aubrey. And I always say, yeah, I've seen pictures of rich Uncle Aubrey standing in front of his trailer and kind of a dead palm tree behind him. Right. But down there she met this young, strapping, handsome man named Buddy Ebsen, Christian Buddy Ebsen, who would later turn out to be the famous Hollywood actor, best known for his television work, Jed Clampett and the Beverly Hillbillies.
But also was supposed to be the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz.
He was. He's allergic to paint.
Right.
What do you know?
Yeah.
And I remember him from two shows, Davy Crockett, where he played Davy Crockett's best friend,
I remember watching that show.
Georgie Russell. Yeah, I was at a place the other night, and I said, you remember Davy Crockett? And the whole audience started singing, not the whole audience, but all of those my age or a little bit younger started singing the Davy
Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier.
Born on a mountaintop, Tennessee, the whole thing.
Right, exactly.
So we all know that and love it and so on. But in my story that I tell is that she and Buddy fell in love. They ended up not getting married because Buddy headed off to Hollywood. She went back to West Virginia, reluctantly married my father. Buddy sent her as a wedding gift this baby alligator who she adored, and she named it Albert. And ultimately, Albert got so big that he chased my future father out in the yard. Homer Sr. started yelling, "It's either me or this alligator, Elsie." And after a few days of thinking it over, she said, "Well, yes, but we have to carry Albert home." Now, the story that I would tell, it has the punchline that I can't give.
No. We don't want too many spoilers here.
But it's so funny that people would say, well, are you going to tell the alligator story? And after a while, it finally clicked in my little head. Actually, I think I heard my mom's voice. Occasionally, I actually hear her voice say, "It's time to tell the alligator story," and which is the same thing. It's time to write a book about me. So that's how it came about.
So this is kind of like a fictionalized memoir in a way, you know, because it's the journey and the way you wrote this. And it's interesting. I always think of Jeanette Walls, who wrote The Glass Castle, but her other book about half-broken horses, and she called it a true a real life novel, is the way she described it. So it was a story of her grandmother, but she added things.
Right.
And I love the way you put this book into sort of like 9 novellas, these smaller pieces. So these wonderful little sort of vignettes.
So you can
but all
skip around to
together.
whichever your favorite is, or tell somebody you need to read the Tarzan, which is, by the way, the feedback I'm getting. Everybody loves the Tarzan movie part to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jeanette's right. I call memoirs novelars. They're really
Novelars, okay.
they are memoirs that use novelistic styles and techniques. But this book, I talked it over to Kate Nensel, my editor there at William Morrow, and she said, "What do you want to call it, Homer?" And I said, "Well, it's all true except for the parts that are not, and they're true too, in their way. It's a family legend."
Sure.
So we're starting a whole new genre, a family legend genre. And she said, "Well, we can't. I don't think there's a place at the bookstore for that."
Oh,
so,
yes.
okay.
Well, we can
So
create one.
we can create. We may start one by doing
Okay.
this.
All right.
But I said, no, I want to call it fiction because every time I go in a bookstore, I look for memoirs, and they're like all over the place. They're like, I'll find Rocket Boys under science or under Appalachian studies, and I go, why don't you just take it out in the street and burn it, because nobody's going to find it here.
Sure.
So okay, let's call it fiction, because it really is. But that's the well-lit part of the bookstore.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
she said, but we'll call it a somewhat true, because it is somewhat true.
Right, sure.
And again, it's all true except that part that isn't. But because it's a family legend, it's true too.
Yeah, but you know what? All families have these legends. These stories that have, whether your parents or your grandparents told you, and with each retelling, they're more embellished, they're more elaborate, but they do become family lore. And I think so many stories, when you think of fiction over the centuries, a lot of it's based on those kind of stories.
Well, it is. It is. I mean, I teach an annual writers class there in Huntsville, Alabama, where I mostly hang my hat these days. And we do it for our church to have a little fundraiser. And I have so many people come to me, writers come to me, and they have this memoir that they want to write, but they don't want to tell the whole thing, or they want to change things, and they're just all torn up about it.
Yeah,
and I go, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and write it the way you want to write it. And at the end of it, you can decide how you want to pitch it. I mean, Rocket Boys, the memoir I'm best known for, I've got a lot of combined characters there. I moved events around. You get to do that with memoirs. If I was writing an autobiography, no. But I'm putting words in people's mouths, real people. But I'm using them. I'm basically taking this character and moving them around. And with Carrying Albert Home, I did the same thing.
Right. But by doing that, sometimes that's the greater truth than just telling things just straight facts.
Precisely.
Yeah, you're filling in all the emotional things.
Yeah. And if you use the techniques of a novelist, that will make the reader want to turn the page to see what happened, as versus just a straight rendition of this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, who cares? What you do care is the people in it. Ultimately, I believe that for any book, what people are really interested in is other people. So if you've got good characters, and thank God I have such interesting parents as Homer and Elsie.
Well, so speaking of them, tell us about Elsie. Tell us about your mom, because like you said in Rocket Boys, you got in the movie, you got a much different picture of who she is as. Well, what was she like as a mom?
Well, she's very independent in the first place, and she had her own mind made up about just about everything. Yeah. It was a matter of her waiting to the proper time and place to tell you what her opinion was about anything, and in other words, to tell you what you were going to do. And that included my father, and that included my brother, and that included me. So in Rocket Boys, that comes out over time. In Carrying Albert Home, we see almost instantly, because she's only 23 years old. So her personality at that time hasn't been somewhat submerged as you get older. Sometimes you learn to kind of be careful with what you say and when you say it, but you work toward getting what you want. And when she's 23 years old, she knows what she wants. She says exactly what she feels. And of course, this constantly hurts my future father's feelings, but we see what a strong fellow he is and how much he adores Elsie that he puts up with that. So my mom was a character till the day that she died. I can remember the governor of West Virginia declared it Homer Hickam Day, and we all descended on Coalwood, where I grew up, to wax eloquently on what a wonderful town this was, and my mother was there, and I thought, let's let Elsie bask in the glow here, but let's not let her say anything. But because I didn't know what would come out of her mouth. But the governor passed a microphone to her when I wasn't able to stop him and say, "Well, Mrs. Hickam, what do you think of being back in Coalwood?" And she said, quote, "I hate this place. I have always hated this place, and now that I'm back, I remember why." And it's like, thank you, Mom.
Oh my God. So she never changed until, oh my gosh.
She never changed.
Oh my gosh, that is classic.
Well,
that is wonderful.
You have to work to love Elsie.
Yeah.
You know, in Carrying Albert Home, I've had a lot of readers say, "I didn't like Elsie at first."
Yeah, well, no, you do. I mean, you don't like her at first, but then you do. But then you start to admire her.
She starts to grow on you.
Well,
and that's what Elsie did. She grew on you after a while. It's like, okay, this woman, she says what she thinks all the time, but by gosh, I love her. And I mean, she had so many constant admirers throughout her life. It's pretty amazing.
So tell us about your dad, Homer Hickam Sr., and about, his love for this woman. He didn't give up easily.
Oh, my dad. Almost all my books, when I start writing about Coalwood, end up being about my dad, one way or the other. He was extremely strong man, quiet, kind of a closet intellectual. He constantly read, constantly read everything he could get his hands on. He was a member of several Books of the Month Club. I tried to read everything he read because he didn't talk to me that much. And even when I was in grade school, I was reading like The Great Gatsby because my dad was reading it, which really helped me, I think, evolve into being interested in literature and writing and so on. My dad is my hero. When I was in Vietnam, I was in the 4th Infantry Division over there, and what I did was pretend quite often that I was my father. What would my dad do in this situation? And he always steered me right, because he was so brave and so strong, yet he was so in love with my mom that he let her get away with anything she wanted. Ultimately, he might argue with her for a little while, but not very hard. And of course, it all started, I guess, in a way, with Albert.
And this story, and I, you write this so visually. I pictured so much reading this book, and so how would your mom tell you the story, and how would she describe Albert to you?
Well, the way I found out was, again, watching the Davy Crockett show, and she came in and she said, "I know that fellow." And I thought, well, I knew you were old, but I didn't know you were that old that you know Davy Crockett. But it turned out to be Buddy Ebsen, who was singing the Davy Crockett show or song. And so throughout my life, it seemed like that I couldn't name any place in the South without either my mom or my dad saying, "We've been there." And I would go, "Well, let me guess, when you were," and we would say at the same time, "When you were carrying Albert home." They used that story mostly it was for fun, because they just enjoyed telling some of these outlandish tales, but quite often it was for a reason. And again, I mentioned Vietnam. Right before I was flying off to Vietnam, I talked to my dad. It's rare that I talk to my dad. Usually when I'd call, he'd hand the phone over to Elsie. So, but this time she wasn't home, and he started telling me the story of when he worked for the railroad that went from Miami down to Key West, and they were caught in the great 1935 hurricane. This was part of the Carrying Albert Home story. And basically he was telling me that I needed to think ahead always. Think ahead what could possibly go wrong and be ready for that. That he didn't do that in this case, and it almost cost his life.
Because there are some dangers on this journey.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought of course, when the journey takes place, we're in the heart of the Depression, what's going on, and you added so much of that, and you know, all the scallywags and all these different characters, I'll put them in, that were in this story. But did you do any research? You know, because I know you had all these stories and all this stuff from your mom and dad, but did you do some research to get some of it right a little bit?
Oh yeah, I'm a pretty good researcher. So
Okay.
so I read a lot of books on it. I went back and read Grapes of Wrath, of course. John Steinbeck shows up in this
He shows up in the book.
in this book. By the way, my mom had an autographed copy of The Red Pony from John Steinbeck that was clearly, so they said, during this while they were carrying Albert home, and so I put that in the book as well. Yeah, I did a lot of research. What I noticed was that for people who were living through the Depression, even the ones who were desperately poor, there was not all the doom and gloom that there is now when we read books that are now written now about the Depression.
Right.
They were living it from day to day, and so and they were pretty strong, tough people back then, and so they didn't do all the doom and gloom. And yes, there were rascals and scalawags who took advantage of the Depression.
Right.
But you know, I did include the people living in what they called the Hoovervilles that were desperately poor. And if you stopped and got food out of your car, you were liable to get robbed.
Right, right. So you had a lot of those characters in there. Even Ernest Hemingway makes an appearance in the book. There was just so many wonderful things, and some of it so much is unexpected. In this book, they're surprising, but they're so wonderfully surprising in this.
Well, what was interesting when I put it all together, you got to realize that this story was told to me at different times in my life, and totally out of sequence. That when I put it all together, I realized that it was a love story, ultimately, that my parents from beyond the grave were sending me a message that here's how we stayed together for over 60 years of marriage and never agreed on anything.
But boy, did they have an epic journey, though.
Yeah, and I think all couples should have that epic journey.
So.
Do you really know someone till you travel with them? I don't think so.
No.
Never get married unless you put an alligator in the back seat and head off to Florida. That's my recommendation.
So I want to know, what kind of pets did you have growing up, knowing that there was this alligator in your parents' past?
Well, Mom raised a pet fox. She named it Parky Carcass. And I vaguely remember Parky. I wrote about him a little bit in Sky of Stone. Then, of course, during most of my years where I wrote about Rocket Boys, there was Chipper the squirrel that lived in the house. And, of course, all kinds of cats and dogs and rabbits and just anything. My mom had a green thumb for both plants and animals. When they moved into the house, they just thrived somehow and lived far beyond their expected life, including her sons. I include us in the animal category. that we were able to have a great life there in Coalwood. I mean, especially with Elsie as our mom. I mean, she was. We just never knew what to expect when we walked in the door, and it was always fun stuff.
Yeah, I bet. So I think this is your 18th book that you've had.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, you've had published. Is it easier each time one comes out? Is it still a little nerve-wracking knowing that the book, here's something, you're putting it out into the world, and knowing that you had, your second book when it comes out, Rocket Boys is an instant success. Actually, is it true that the movie came out before you had?
There was a race to see whether the movie or the book would come out, so they moved the book up a few months. It barely beat the movie, but it was all good. I mean, it's like a 1-2 punch, right?
Oh, sure.
Hardcover comes out, and the movie like 4 months behind comes out. I mean, come on, that's perfect. And that happens so rarely. In terms of nervousness, as I told my wonderful editor, Kate Nensel, who was waxing on about all the wonderful reviews that we were already getting for carrying Albert home, and all of the 16 now international publishers that we have for more than Rocket Boys, and all the literary awards that were starting to come in for it. I said, Kate, this is all wonderful, but I just want you to know, the day after this book comes out, I will have descended into hell, because none of that matters. What really matters is, well, are people going to actually buy this book and read it? And we really have little control over that.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't think you have any worries on this one. Yeah. So each little novella within each. Did you have to put them together like a puzzle piece? Because, like you said, your parents would tell you them at different times, and they weren't chronological in the way of this journey.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about all that until I started putting it together. With that story that I told, I always said, and then they put Albert in the back seat, and they drove night and day, night and day, night and day, night and day, and I just didn't say what happened to him, and then they arrived in Florida. Yeah. Then when I started putting it all together, that's when and I didn't include all the stories, by the way. We could have a part two on that. It was like, okay, that one's kind of more like something else. And also it depended on who was telling it, whether his dad was telling it or my mom was telling it. So yeah, when I put it all together, I was a bit surprised at how it flowed all together. Late in the telling, I decided to put in the interstitial parts where I say, well, I was this age and my mom or my dad told me this story, so that you can also you get a sense who's the narrator here, and also how this story is coming to me. Because sometimes I'm 12 years old, and then sometimes I'm 50 some years old or 60 years old when I'm hearing the story.
Right,
so we had already had the manuscript in draft form when I decided, or I called Kate, the editor, and said, Kate, I've got this idea to put in these little moments about when I was told the story, and she loved that idea. So we stopped the presses and wrote them and put them in there.
Those were so good. I mean, it's so true. But how you do hear family stories, and it is how and you remember the age you were when you heard it, and the impression it made. I thought that was a great addition.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with Rocket Boys, and knowing what's happened since the publication, but you had written a previous nonfiction piece.
That's true. A book called Torpedo Junction
Junction
that just got optioned for a major motion picture. Can you believe it? It
Wow,
came out
so
in
that came out
1989.
Oh my gosh.
I'd almost forgotten I'd written it.
Oh my gosh! Well, tell us about that first book, and now that it may become on the big screen.
Yeah, you never know. Well, 15 years of research. When I came back from Vietnam, I became a scuba instructor, and I was working day job as an engineer. I started writing about scuba diving and diving on these shipwrecks, and that kind of got to be my specialty. I was called up to North Carolina by Sport Diver magazine to dive on this German U-boat that had just been found. It was like 1973. I'm going, why is a German U-boat out there? Nobody knew. I started doing the research, and that ultimately turned into this book called Torpedo Junction, and that's a true history of the U-boat war up and down the East Coast during World War II. I thought that was a book I was meant to write. Like I said, it took 15 years of research, and Rocket Boys came about as something of a surprise. I just wrote a short article for a magazine that was looking for a filler. They wanted a 2,000-word filler. That was one of those kismet things that was just meant to be.
But when you think about it, and thinking about back to your childhood for Rocket Boys, and thinking back about your parents, I mean, that must have been wonderful just to sit and write this book. I mean, to think about your parents and their life before you were on the scene. Yeah,
every time I write about Colwood and my parents, I say I get $1 million worth of psychotherapy I don't even know I need. And it happened again. With Rocket Boys, it definitely did, because I had to put myself, because it's a 14 through 17-year-old Sonny Hickam that tells this story. That meant I had to take this old brain and put it inside that boy and let him tell the story. So and come out with all the hurts and the painful experiences and so on. With this book, though, the only thing that was tough with this book psychologically was to try to get in the head of these people I knew so well, but when they were 23 years old, had no clue that I or my brother was ever going to exist, or even that they were going to come back to Colwood, or what was going to happen. So I needed to get inside of their head and basically, not basically, but really let that story evolve with these characters as they were then, and not be colored by them as I knew later, except for those interstitial pieces, and then the very end where my mom has, of course, always the final say.
Yes, right. Exactly. So your years in the Army and the military, and then working at NASA, And those years, how did those years inform you as a writer, and what you're writing today?
Well, I'll tell you what, Becky, if it hadn't been for Sputnik and me getting so enamored with that, I would have probably become an English professor, because that was really, I mean, all my teachers thought I was going to be a writer or teaching literature or something, and they were disappointed when I went off, I diverged. But I'm glad I did, because in fact I met so many different people. I traveled the world as an engineer, both for the Army and for NASA, and I got to meet some crazy people, I tell you, along the way, that I probably would never have as an English professor. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're kind of cloistered there. So I think it's good for me. I guess the only bad part is that quite often I'm presented as Homer Hickam, the author of Carrying Albert Home. He's a NASA engineer, and it's like, then I have to get them off of that. Okay, yeah, all right, but but that's not a bad negative. I mean, that is the way a lot of folks, because they've seen the movie, they're a little bit disappointed that I'm not a true NASA engineer, but I'll tell you how they're even more disappointed, that I'm not Jake Gyllenhaal.
Well, I was reading something saying that Jake Gyllenhaal should play your dad if they make a movie version of Carrying Albert Home.
Wouldn't that be something?
That would be pretty cool.
But could the universe?
He played you, and now he's going to play your dad.
Could the universe stand it that he would play both Homer Jr. and Homer Sr.?
Maybe not.
Well, I'd like to find out. I mean, he would be great in that role.
He would be great. He would be great. Yeah. So I read that there's a scholarship in honor of your dad. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
There is a scholarship. Actually, there's two. There's one at Virginia Tech, which is in honor of my father, and also at Marshall University. There's a scholarship there as well that we've set up. And of course, folks think it's mine because it says Homer Hickam Scholarship, but it's really in honor of my dad. And for the ones who get that scholarship, we make sure that they're aware of that. And I think that my dad didn't have a degree, and I think that of all the things that I've done, setting up scholarships for young people to get degrees would probably be the thing that he'd like the most.
Oh, wow, he'd be so honored with that. So what do you hope readers will take away from reading Carrying Albert Home?
I just hope that they enjoy it, that it gives them a laugh, because there are a lot of funny parts to it. But I guess at the same time, I think especially for people who perhaps have lost a love, and who amongst us have not lost a love, I hope that this book, in a way, gives them a little bit of solace to just say, love endures past death or absence or anything else. The love is there. You just have to go back in your mind to that time when it was really vibrant and full. And so I hope that people get that from the book, and that they want to give Albert to folks who perhaps maybe just need something that is different, but also will be a bit uplifting, and especially remind them of how wonderful being in love is.
Right, yeah, and I think you accomplished that for sure.
Hope so.
Homer, thank you so much, and congratulations on Carrying Albert Home.
Thank you, Becky.
What a great conversation with New York Times bestselling author of Rocket Boys. It's Homer Hickam and his new novel, Carrying Albert Home. You've got to read this one. Thanks for joining me on Authors Reveal.